The best gift this Thanksgiving is if you disappear." Those words hit me like a slap across the face, spoken by my daughter-in-law Sabine in front of my entire family. She thought I'd crumble and leave quietly. But what she didn't know was that I was holding a different kind of gift, one wrapped in truth. First, let me thank you for watching Letters to Helen. Please subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. My name is Celeste, and I'm 68 years old. For most of my life, I believed that family meant loyalty, sacrifice, and unconditional love. I raised my son Graham as a single mother after his father died in a car accident when Graham was only 12. I worked double shifts as a nurse, saved every penny for his college education, and watched him grow into a man I was proud to call my son. When Graham married Sabine 7 years ago, I tried so hard to welcome her. She was young, 24 to his 32, with long blonde hair and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Something about her always felt calculated, but I pushed those feelings aside. Graham loved her, and that was enough for me. Then came the baby, little Marcus, born just 11 months after their wedding. A beautiful boy with dark hair and Graham's gentle eyes, or so I thought. Marcus became the light of our family, and I spent every weekend babysitting, every holiday, spoiling him with gifts, every birthday, planning elaborate parties. But 3 years ago, everything changed when my husband passed away from a heart attack. At 65, I found myself alone in a house that felt too big, too quiet, too empty. That's when I met Silas at a grief support group. He was 71, a retired contractor who had lost his wife to cancer 2 years earlier. We understood each other's pain in a way that felt healing. Silas was kind, patient, and gentle. He brought me flowers every Tuesday, called me every morning just to hear my voice, and slowly helped me remember what it felt like to be cherished. When he proposed after 18 months of courtship, I said yes without hesitation. Graham seemed happy for me, and even little Marcus called Silas Grandpa Cy with genuine affection. The wedding was small but perfect, just family and close friends in my backyard garden. Sabine was polite but distant, which I attributed to the awkwardness of having a new stepfather-in-law. I was so focused on my newfound happiness that I missed something important happening right under my nose. If I had been paying closer attention, I might have noticed how Sabine watched Silas that day, studying him with an intensity that felt less like admiration and more like possession. The first few months of marriage to Silas felt like a second chance at happiness. We settled into a comfortable routine in his spacious house on Maple Street, a beautiful colonial with a wraparound porch that reminded me of the home I'd always dreamed of. Silas had insisted I move in with him, saying his place was bigger and better, suited for hosting family gatherings. I should have questioned why hosting family suddenly became so important to him. Graham and Marcus visited every Sunday for dinner, and I treasured those moments watching my new husband teach my grandson how to use his old woodworking tools in the garage. Silas seemed genuinely fond of the boy, always patient when Marcus accidentally dropped screws or struggled with the smaller pieces. "He's got good hands," Silas would say, ruffling Marcus's dark hair. Reminds me of myself at that age. I found those comments sweet then. Now they make my stomach turn. Sabine rarely joined these Sunday visits, claiming she had work obligations or social commitments. When she did come, she'd spend most of the time on her phone, typing furiously with a secretive smile that never included the rest of us. She'd glance up occasionally, her eyes lingering on Silas in a way that made me uncomfortable. She's just adjusting to having a stepfather-in-law, I told myself whenever I caught those looks. This is awkward for everyone. But there were other things, small things that didn't quite add up, like how Sabine suddenly started asking personal questions about Silas's financial situation during casual conversations. Has Silas mentioned his retirement accounts? "I'm just worried about you both having enough security," she'd say with fake concern. Or how she began making subtle comments about Marcus's features. "Isn't it strange, Celeste, how sometimes children don't resemble the man who raises them at all?" She'd say this while staring directly at Silas as if waiting for some kind of reaction. The most unsettling moment came during Marcus's 5th birthday party in our backyard. I was cutting cake when I overheard Sabine talking to Silas by the garden shed, their voices low but urgent. I couldn't make out the exact words, but I caught fragments. Responsible, obligation, and the right thing. When I approached with cake slices, they immediately stopped talking and smiled those bright, artificial smiles that people use when they've been caught discussing something they shouldn't. Just talking about Marcus's future, Sabine said quickly. How important it is for him to have strong male role models. Silas nodded, but his face had gone pale, and his hands were trembling slightly as he took the cake plate. That night I asked him about the conversation, but he brushed it off as parenting talk and changed the subject. For the first time since Robert died, I felt like a stranger in my own family, something involving Marcus, and a secret I wasn't supposed to uncover. The confrontation came 3 weeks later, on a rainy Tuesday evening when Graham had to work late. Sabine showed up at our door unannounced, holding Marcus's hand and wearing an expression I'd never seen before. Determined, almost predatory. "We need to talk," she said, pushing past me into the living room, where Silas was reading his evening paper. Marcus ran to him immediately. "Grandpa, sigh, look what I drew at school." He held up a crayon drawing of stick figures labeled me, Mommy, and Daddy. But there was a 4th figure, taller than the others, labeled Grandpa Sigh, with a big smile. Sabine's eyes fixed on that drawing with an intensity that made my blood run cold. "Marcus, honey, go play in the kitchen for a few minutes," she said, her voice artificially sweet. Mommy needs to have a grown-up conversation. Once Marcus was out of earshot, Sabine turned to face us both, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. The rain drummed against the windows, creating an ominous soundtrack for whatever was about to unfold. "I can't keep this secret anymore," she began, her voice trembling with what seemed like genuine emotion. "It's eating me alive, and it's not fair to any of us." Silas set down his newspaper, and I noticed his hands were shaking slightly. "What secret?" I asked, though something deep in my gut already knew. I didn't want to hear the answer. Sabine took a deep breath, then looked directly at Silas. "Marcus isn't Graham's son. He's yours." The words hung in the air like poison gas. I felt the room spinning, my legs suddenly unable to support my weight. I gripped the back of the sofa to steady myself. "That's impossible," I whispered. "You're lying." But Sabine continued, her voice gaining strength. "It happened before Graham and I got married. We had a fight, broke up for 2 months. I was working as a receptionist at the construction company where Silas was consulting. He was lonely after his wife died. I was young and confused, and we found comfort in each other. I turned to look at my husband, expecting him to deny it, to call her crazy, to defend our marriage. Instead, his face had gone ashen, and his eyes were fixed on the floor. "Silas!" My voice cracked as I said his name. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but nothing came out, and the silence was louder than any confession. Suddenly, all those moments came flooding back. "He's got good hands." Reminds me of myself at that age. The way Silas looked at Marcus during those Sunday dinners. The conversation by the garden shed about responsibility and obligation. If you're still watching, please hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments if you've ever had someone drop a bombshell like this in your family. Your support means everything to me. The silence in that room was deafening, broken only by Marcus's innocent laughter, echoing from the kitchen as he played with his toys, completely unaware that his entire world and mine had just been shattered. What happened next broke my heart in ways I didn't know were possible. Silas finally looked up at me, his eyes filled with what I thought was guilt and shame. "Celeste, I need to tell you something. There were times when I looked at Marcus that I wondered, but I pushed those thoughts away because I loved you so much. I felt like I was drowning." "You're saying you believe her?" "I don't know what to believe anymore," he whispered. "But if there's even a chance that Marcus is my son, I can't just ignore it. I abandoned one family when my first wife got sick. I can't abandon another child." Sabine stepped forward, and for the first time that evening, her mask slipped slightly. I caught a glimpse of something calculating behind her tears. "I don't want to destroy your marriage, Celeste. Marcus deserves to know who his real father is, and he deserves support." The word support hung in the air like a sword waiting to fall. "What kind of support?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "Financial," Sabine said simply. "Graham's struggling with his job right now, and Marcus needs things. School supplies, clothes that fit, activities that other kids take for granted. If Silas is his biological father, then he has a responsibility." I watched my husband's face crumble under the weight of imagined obligation. Silas had always been a man driven by duty and guilt. It's what made him such a devoted husband to his first wife during her cancer battle, and such a caring partner to me. But now that same sense of responsibility was being weaponized against him. "How much?" Silas asked quietly. $500 a month, Sabine replied without hesitation, as if she'd already calculated this down to the penny. "Nothing that would hurt your household, but enough to make a real difference in Marcus's life. If you know how it feels to watch someone you love be manipulated, please hit that like button. It helps me share these stories. And tell me in the comments if you've ever seen guilt used as a weapon. $500 every month for a child that might not even be his." I opened my mouth to protest, to demand proof, to insist on a paternity test. But Silas spoke first. "I'll do it," he said. And with those 3 words, I watched my husband step out of our marriage and into her trap. Sabine's relief was immediate and telling. She hugged Silas tightly, whispering, "Thank you," over and over, while I stood there feeling like a stranger in my own marriage. "But this stays between us," Silas added firmly. "Graham can never know. It would destroy him." And just like that, my husband became complicit in a secret that would begin tearing our family apart from the inside. In that moment, I realized she wasn't just taking our money. She was erasing me, one check at a time. After Sabine left with Marcus that night, Silas and I sat in our living room not speaking, both lost in our own thoughts. I kept waiting for him to change his mind, to realize how convenient Sabine's timing was, how neatly her story explained away years of financial struggles. Instead, he pulled out his checkbook and wrote the first payment. What I didn't know then was that this was only the beginning, and Sabine had already planned her next demand. For 6 months, I lived in a marriage built on lies and silence. Silas would disappear to his study on the 15th of every month, claiming he needed to balance the books. I'd hear the scratch of his pen, the tear of a check, and then the careful closing of his desk drawer. I tried to pretend everything was normal. I cooked his favorite meals. We watched our evening shows together, and on Sundays we still hosted Graham and Marcus for dinner. But something fundamental had shifted between us. Where there used to be easy conversation, now there were careful words. Where there used to be trust, now there were secrets. The worst part was watching Silas with Marcus during those family dinners. He'd study the boy's face when he thought no one was looking, searching for resemblances that might validate Sabine's story. He'd ruffle Marcus's hair and say things like, "You're getting so tall," just like I did at your age, as if he was trying to convince himself. It made me sick to my stomach. Graham seemed oblivious to the tension, chatting about his new promotion at the marketing firm and his plans to finally take Sabine on a proper vacation. "Things are really looking up for us," he'd say with genuine happiness. "We might even be able to afford that house in Riverside that Sabine's been wanting." If only he knew that his stepfather was already funding their lifestyle. He was building dreams on a foundation of lies, and he didn't even know it. The discovery came by accident on a Thursday morning in October. Silas had left for his weekly golf game, and I was cleaning his study when I knocked over a stack of papers on his desk. As I bent to pick them up, I saw something that made my blood freeze. Bank statements. Months and months of them, with highlighted entries showing transfers to an account I didn't recognize. But it wasn't just the monthly payments that shocked me. There were additional amounts. 500 became 700. 7 became 1,000. By September, $1,500 vanished from our account. The payments were escalating. I sat in Silas's leather chair, surrounded by evidence of betrayal. and felt something cold settle in my chest. This wasn't about a guilty conscience or fatherly duty anymore. This was systematic. This was planned. My hands shaking, I opened his desk drawer, the one he'd been so careful to lock every month. Inside, I found copies of the checks, each one made out to S. Morrison, with notes in the memo line for Marcus. School supplies. Emergency medical. Emergency medical. Marcus had been perfectly healthy all year. But what broke my heart most was a handwritten note tucked beneath the checks, written in Sabine's looping handwriting. Silas, Marcus keeps asking why Grandpa Cy can't come to his school play next week. I told him you're too busy, but maybe if you could help with the costume expenses, $300, we could arrange something special. He misses you so much. S. She was using that little boy's emotions as leverage for more money. I don't know how long I sat there, holding that note and feeling my marriage crumble around me. But when I heard Silas's car in the driveway, I carefully put everything back exactly as I'd found it. I needed time to think, time to plan, because if Sabine wanted to play games with my family, she was about to learn that I could play them too. That evening, I made Silas's favorite dinner, pot roast with mashed potatoes and green beans, and set the table with our best china. I wanted everything to feel normal when I destroyed his world, the same way mine had been destroyed 6 months earlier. "This looks wonderful, honey," he said, settling into his chair and reaching for my hand across the table. "What's the special occasion?" I smiled and squeezed his fingers gently. Can't a wife cook a nice meal for her husband without a special occasion? We ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes, and I watched him savor each bite, completely unaware of the storm about to hit. Finally, when he'd finished his second helping, I set down my fork and looked directly into his eyes. "Silas, I found the bank statements." His fork clattered against his plate. The color drained from his face so quickly I thought he might faint. "Celeste, I can explain. $1,500 last month," I continued calmly. $1,000 the month before. $700 before that. And those little notes from Sabine asking for costume money and emergency medical expenses for a perfectly healthy child. He opened his mouth, then closed it, looking like a fish gasping for air. "How long were you planning to lie to me?" I asked. "How long were you going to let her bleed us dry while I sat here like a fool, wondering why my husband had become a stranger?" "It's not what you think," he said weakly. "She's not asking for the extra money. I'm offering it because Marcus is my responsibility." I laughed, and the sound was bitter even to my own ears. "Your responsibility? Silas, you don't even know if that child is yours. You took the word of a woman who's been manipulating our family from the beginning. She showed me pictures," he said desperately. "Marcus at different ages. The resemblance is undeniable. Children resemble lots of people," I shot back. "Marcus has dark hair like half the population. That doesn't make you his father." Silas pushed back from the table and began pacing our small dining room. "You don't understand the guilt I carry. Celeste, when my first wife was dying, I was so focused on work, so scared of losing everything that I failed her. I can't fail another child. So you're failing your current wife instead?" He stopped pacing and looked at me with genuine pain in his eyes. "I love you, Celeste, more than I've ever loved anyone. But if Marcus is my son, then get a paternity test," I interrupted. "One simple test that would answer all our questions. But you won't do that, will you? Because deep down, you know Sabine is lying." The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Outside, I could hear our neighbor's dog barking and the distant sound of children playing in the street. Normal life continuing while mine fell apart. "I can't ask for a test," Silas finally whispered. "It would destroy Graham. He loves that boy." "And what about destroying us?" I asked. "What about the marriage we built on trust and honesty? Does that mean nothing to you?" He couldn't answer me. And in that silence, I realized that my husband was either the most gullible man alive, or he was hiding something even darker than I'd imagined. If you're still watching, please like this video. It helps more people find these stories. And tell me in the comments, would you demand a paternity test or try to keep the peace? That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to Silas's restless breathing beside me, and made a decision that would change everything. The decision I made that sleepless night was simple. I was going to find out the truth about Marcus's paternity, with or without my husband's cooperation. If Silas wouldn't protect our marriage, then I would protect myself. The next morning, I called my old friend Janet, who worked as a nurse at the same hospital where I'd spent 30 years of my career. Janet had connections everywhere, including the lab that processed DNA tests. "I need a favor," I told her over coffee at our usual diner. "And I need you to promise you'll never tell anyone about this conversation." Janet's eyes lit up with curiosity. She'd always loved a good family drama, and I could see her mental wheels turning as I explained my situation, carefully leaving out the financial details. "So, you want to test the boy's DNA without anyone knowing?" she asked. Just to put my mind at rest, I lied smoothly. Silas is tearing himself apart with guilt over something that might not even be true. Janet leaned forward conspiratorially. "I can get you a kit, but you'll need samples from both the child and Silas. Hair with roots, saliva, that sort of thing. How long for results? 2 weeks if you pay extra for expedited processing. 2 weeks. That would put the results right around Thanksgiving. Perfect timing for a family gathering where everyone would be together." Getting Silas's sample was easy. I collected hair from his brush and carefully stored it according to Janet's instructions. Getting Marcus's sample required more creativity. The opportunity came the following Sunday when Graham and Marcus visited for dinner. While the men were in the garage working on a birdhouse project, I offered to help Marcus with his homework at the kitchen table. "I'm thirsty, Grandma Celeste," he said, looking up from his math worksheet with those innocent dark eyes. "Let me get you some juice, sweetheart." I poured him a glass of apple juice and watched him drink it, then carefully wrapped the glass in a kitchen towel when he finished. Later, I swabbed the rim for saliva and packaged it according to Janet's specifications. I felt terrible deceiving that sweet little boy, but I told myself it was for his own good. If Silas wasn't his father, then Marcus deserved to know the truth about his real parentage. And if Sabine was lying, she needed to be exposed before she destroyed what was left of our family. The DNA kit went out in the mail on a Tuesday. The waiting began immediately. During those 2 weeks, the tension in our house became unbearable. Silas continued his monthly payments, but now he knew I was watching. He'd flinch every time I mentioned money, and he started checking the mailbox before I could get to it, as if he expected more demands from Sabine. He was right to be worried. 3 days before Thanksgiving, Sabine called our house directly, something she'd never done before. I answered the phone while Silas was in the shower. "Celeste, I hope you don't mind me calling," she said in that syrupy voice that always made my skin crawl. "I wanted to discuss Thanksgiving dinner arrangements." "What about them?" I asked carefully. "Well, I think it's time Marcus knew the truth about his real father. I've been thinking about it all year, and hiding this secret is hurting everyone involved." My grip tightened on the phone. "What are you suggesting?" "I think Silas should tell Graham and Marcus together at Thanksgiving dinner. It's the perfect family setting, and the truth deserves to come out." The audacity of this woman was breathtaking. She wanted to detonate our entire family at Thanksgiving dinner, with everyone gathered around the table like some twisted Norman Rockwell painting. "I don't think that's a good idea," I said firmly. "It's not really your decision, is it?" Sabine's voice had lost its fake sweetness. "Silas is Marcus's father, and he has every right to claim his son publicly. Unless, of course, you have some reason to keep them apart." The threat in her voice was unmistakable. She was telling me to step aside or face the consequences. "I'll discuss it with Silas," I said through gritted teeth. "You do that," Sabine replied. "And Celeste, the best gift this Thanksgiving would be if you just disappeared. Let the real family have their moment." She hung up before I could respond, leaving me standing in my kitchen, shaking with rage and clutching a phone that felt like a weapon in my hand. But what Sabine didn't know was that I had my own Thanksgiving surprise waiting in the mail. The DNA results arrived on Wednesday morning, the day before Thanksgiving. I signed for the certified envelope with hands that trembled so badly I could barely hold the pen. The delivery man gave me a concerned look and asked if I was all right, but I just nodded and closed the door. I sat at my kitchen table staring at that envelope for what felt like hours. Inside was either vindication or the complete destruction of everything I thought I knew about my marriage. Either way, my life was about to change forever. When I finally tore it open, the words on the page hit me like a physical blow. Probability of paternity, 0%. The tested male is excluded as the biological father of the tested child. For a moment, I thought I'd misread it. I blinked, read it again, and again, but the words didn't change. 0%. Silas was not Marcus's father. But there was more. The report included additional analysis I hadn't requested. Apparently, Janet had called in some favors. The DNA showed that Marcus was also not Graham's biological son. The child we'd all loved and cherished for 6 years belonged to neither of the men who'd been fighting over him. I read the results 3 times before the full implications sank in. Sabine had been running a con game this entire time, playing 2 men against each other while the real father was nowhere to be found. She'd manipulated Silas's guilt, exploited Graham's love, and nearly destroyed my marriage, all for money. That night, I barely slept. I kept the DNA results hidden in my jewelry box, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal them. Sabine wanted to make Thanksgiving dinner into a dramatic revelation. She was about to get more drama than she'd bargained for. Thanksgiving morning dawned gray and cold, matching my mood perfectly. I spent the day cooking. Turkey, stuffing, cranberry sauce, all the traditional dishes, while Silas paced nervously around the house. He knew something was coming. Sabine had called him after our conversation and told him about her plan to share the truth with the family. Maybe we should cancel, he said for the 4th time, as I basted the turkey. Tell everyone we're sick. Absolutely not, I replied firmly. This family needs to hear the truth. All of it. When Graham arrived with Sabine and Marcus at 4 o'clock, the tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Graham seemed oblivious, chatting happily about his day off work and complimenting the smell of dinner. Marcus ran straight to Silas, hugging his legs and chattering about his school play. But Sabine watched me like a predator studying its prey. She was dressed to kill in a black cocktail dress that was completely inappropriate for a family dinner. Her makeup perfect. Her blonde hair styled like she was attending a premiere instead of Thanksgiving. She wasn't here to celebrate Thanksgiving. She was here to stage a performance. "Celeste, you look tired," she said with fake concern as she handed me a bottle of cheap wine. "Are you feeling all right? You seem stressed." "I'm fine," I replied, taking the wine and noting that it probably cost less than one of Silas's monthly payments to her. Just excited for our family dinner. We gathered around the dining room table, and I watched Sabine position herself strategically between Silas and Marcus. She kept touching Marcus's hair, making little comments about how much he resembled certain people at the table, and shooting meaningful looks at Silas. "Graham, honey, would you say grace?" I asked, buying myself a few more minutes to observe the dynamics. As Graham bowed his head and began thanking God for our blessings, I saw Sabine reach under the table and squeeze Silas's hand. My husband's face went pale, and he kept glancing nervously between Marcus and me. "Amen," Graham finished, and we all echoed him. "So," Sabine said brightly as we began passing dishes, "I thought this would be the perfect time for our family to have an important conversation about truth and honesty and making sure everyone knows where they really belong." She smiled at me across the table, and I smiled right back. "You're absolutely right, Sabine," I said, my voice steady as granite. "Because tonight, Sabine, your performance ends." Sabine's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second before she recovered her composure, but I caught it, that tiny flicker of uncertainty that told me she wasn't as confident as she pretended to be. "Performance?" She laughed, but the sound was forced. "Celeste, I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm simply suggesting that we stop living with secrets that are hurting this family." Graham looked confused, glancing between his wife and me. "What secrets? What's going on here?" Nothing that concerns you, honey, Sabine said quickly, reaching over to squeeze Graham's hand. This is between the adults who've been carrying this burden. I watched her work, marveling at how smoothly she manipulated the conversation. Every word was calculated to make Graham feel excluded, while positioning herself as the keeper of important family truths. Celeste's been struggling with some adjustments since her marriage to Silas, Sabine continued, her voice dripping with false sympathy. I think it's been hard for her to accept that she's not the center of this family anymore. The words hit like a slap. Graham shifted uncomfortably in his seat, and even little Marcus seemed to sense the tension, pushing his mashed potatoes around his plate instead of eating. I'm sorry, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. Sabine leaned back in her chair, clearly emboldened by what she perceived as my stunned silence. Oh, don't get me wrong, Celeste. You've been adequate as a stepmother-in-law, but there are some relationships that go deeper than marriage certificates. Aren't there, Silas? She turned to my husband, who looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. There are bonds of blood that can't be broken, no matter who signs what papers. Sabine, please, Silas whispered, but she steamrolled right over him. Marcus, sweetie, tell Grandma Celeste about the special time you spent with Grandpa Si last weekend, she said, ruffling the boy's hair. The day trip they took while Mommy had to work. I felt my blood turn to ice. What day trip? Graham looked equally confused. What day trip? Sabine, you told me you were taking Marcus to your sister's house last Saturday. Well, for the first time, Sabine looked genuinely flustered. It was a last-minute change of plans. Silas offered to help with Marcus while I had to handle some work emergency. But Marcus, sweet innocent Marcus, chose that moment to pipe up with the brutal honesty that only children possess. Grandpa Si took me to the toy store and bought me the big robot I wanted, he announced proudly. Mommy said it was our secret. But secrets are bad, right, Grandma Celeste? The silence that followed was deafening. Graham's face went through a series of expressions. Confusion, hurt, and finally, a dawning understanding that something very wrong was happening in his family. A secret shopping trip. Graham's voice was barely above a whisper. Silas, why would you take my son shopping without telling me? And why would it be a secret? Sabine rushed to fill the silence. It wasn't meant to be secretive, Graham. It's just that some relationships don't need to be announced. To everyone at the table, she turned to look directly at me, and her mask finally slipped completely. The fake sweetness was gone, replaced by cold calculation. The truth is, Celeste, some people belong at this table, and some people are just visiting. Some of us have real connections to this family that go back generations, and some of us are just new additions who haven't quite learned their place yet. And what place is that? I asked, my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. Sabine smiled, and it was the most vicious expression I'd ever seen on a human face. Honestly, the best gift this Thanksgiving would be if you just disappeared. Let the real family have their moment without having to tiptoe around someone who doesn't really belong here anyway. The words hung in the air like poison gas. Graham gasped audibly. Even Marcus stopped playing with his food and looked up at his mother with wide, confused eyes. I reached into my purse slowly, letting the silence stretch. Everyone's eyes followed my hand as if they already knew. I was about to end the charade. If you're still with me, drop a comment with the word truth, because that's what's about to explode at this table. I pulled out the DNA results and placed them gently on the table next to the cranberry sauce. You know what, Sabine? You're absolutely right. It's time for people to know exactly where they belong. She wanted me to disappear, but tonight, the only thing disappearing would be her lies. Sabine's eyes locked onto the envelope like a hawk spotting prey. For a split second, I saw genuine fear flash across her face, but she recovered quickly, leaning forward with renewed aggression. What's that supposed to be? She asked, but her voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. Oh, this. I picked up the envelope and turned it over in my hands casually. Just some paperwork I've been waiting to share with the family. But please, Sabine, you were about to tell us about these deep family connections. Don't let me interrupt. Graham was looking between us like he was watching a tennis match. Completely lost. Can someone please explain what's happening here? What connections? What secrets? Sabine shot me one more venomous look, then seemed to make a decision. She straightened her shoulders, reached across the table to take Marcus's small hand in hers, and looked directly at Graham. There's something I should have told you years ago, Graham. Something I kept quiet because I was trying to protect everyone involved. Sabine. Silas's voice was barely a whisper, but she silenced him with a sharp look. No, Silas. It's time. We can't live with this guilt anymore. And Marcus deserves to know the truth about who his real father is. Graham went completely still. What are you talking about? I am his father. No, honey. Sabine's voice took on that syrupy tone she used when she was manipulating someone. You're not. Marcus isn't your biological son. The words hit Graham like a physical blow. He actually recoiled in his chair, his face going white as paper. That's impossible. We were together when he was conceived. We were engaged. Remember when we broke up for those 2 months before our wedding? Sabine continued relentlessly. When you said you needed space to figure out if you really wanted to get married. Graham nodded numbly. Of course he remembered. It had been the worst 2 months of his life. Well, I was hurt and angry, and I made some mistakes. Sabine turned to look at Silas, with what she probably thought was a meaningful gaze. I was working at Morrison Construction, and Silas was there almost every day, consulting on the big shopping center project. He was so kind to me, so understanding about what I was going through. Silas looked like he was going to be sick. Little Marcus was staring at his mother with confusion, not understanding the adult conversation but sensing that something terrible was happening. We found comfort in each other, Sabine continued, her voice gaining strength as she spun her web of lies. It only happened a few times, but when I found out I was pregnant, well, the timing made it clear who the real father was. Graham's chair scraped against the floor as he pushed back from the table. You're lying. This is some sick joke. Look at him, Graham, Sabine said, stroking Marcus's hair. Really look at him. The dark hair, the brown eyes, the way he holds his shoulders. He doesn't look anything like you. But he looks exactly like Silas did at that age. I watched my husband crumble under the weight of her accusations. Part of me wanted to stop this charade immediately, to protect him from her lies. But I needed everyone to hear the full extent of her manipulation before I revealed the truth. That's why Silas has been so involved with Marcus, Sabine pressed on. Why he takes him on special trips, buys him expensive gifts, spends so much time with him. He's been trying to be a father to his son without destroying your marriage to Celeste. Graham turned to stare at Silas with a mixture of betrayal and heartbreak that made my chest ache. Is this true? Have you been paying for your son while letting me think he was mine? Silas opened his mouth, but no words came out. His silence was damning. 6 years, Graham whispered. 6 years I've loved that boy, raised him, called him my son, and you've both been lying to me this entire time. Marcus started to cry, sensing the tension and not understanding why everyone was upset. Daddy, why are you sad? Did I do something wrong? The sound of that little boy calling Graham Daddy, while Sabine systematically destroyed their relationship, was the cruelest thing I'd ever witnessed. No, baby, Graham said, his voice breaking as he reached for Marcus. You didn't do anything wrong. Nothing about this is your fault. Sabine pulled Marcus closer to her side, physically removing him from Graham's reach. Marcus, honey, Mommy needs to tell you something important. Graham will always love you, but your real daddy is right here at this table. She turned Marcus to face Silas, who looked like he wanted to crawl under the table and disappear. Say hello to your real father, sweetheart. The room held its breath. Even the clinking of silverware stopped. All that existed in that moment was Sabine's lie, and the silence it demanded we accept. I let her finish weaving her masterpiece of deception, because the higher she climbed, the further she was about to fall. I cleared my throat and slowly tore open the envelope, and with that single tear of paper, her entire performance was about to collapse. The sound of tearing paper cut through the silence like a blade. Everyone's eyes were on me as I pulled out the official laboratory report, the letterhead clearly visible from across the table. You know, Sabine, I said, my voice perfectly calm. You're absolutely right that Marcus deserves to know the truth about his real father. So I took it upon myself to find out exactly who that is. Sabine's face went from triumphant to confused to terrified in the span of 3 seconds. What is that? This, I said, holding up the DNA report, is a paternity test. Official, certified, and completely accurate. I had it done 2 weeks ago using samples from both Marcus and Silas. Graham's head snapped up. A paternity test? Celeste, what does it say? I looked directly at Sabine, watching the color drain from her face as she realized her world was about to implode. It says that Silas Crowder is not the biological father of Marcus Morrison. 0% probability. Completely excluded. The silence that followed was deafening. Silas stared at me like I'd just told him he'd won the lottery and been diagnosed with cancer in the same breath. That's impossible, Sabine whispered. But her voice had lost all its earlier confidence. The test must be wrong. Labs make mistakes all the time. Oh, but I'm not finished, I said, savoring every word. You see, I was so curious about Marcus's real parentage that I asked them to run a comparison against Graham's profile as well, just to be thorough. Graham leaned forward, hope flickering in his eyes for the first time all evening. And Graham Morrison is also not the biological father of Marcus Morrison. The words hit the table like a bomb. For 6 years, Sabine built her empire of lies on 2 men's shoulders, and in a single piece of paper, it all turned to dust. So you see, Sabine, I continued, my voice gaining strength with each revelation, Marcus isn't Graham's son. He isn't Silas's son, which means you've been running a con game on both of them for 6 years, playing them against each other while the real father is nowhere to be found. No, Sabine said, shaking her head frantically. No, that's not. There has to be some mistake. I know who I was with. I remember. What you remember, I interrupted, is spinning whatever story would get you the most money and the most sympathy. You told Graham that Marcus was his son to trap him into marriage. Then when you met Silas, you saw a lonely widower with retirement savings and decided to play the guilt card. I stood up from my chair, still holding the DNA report like a weapon. You've been bleeding my husband dry for months, haven't you? $500 became $700. $700 became $1,000. And by last month you were taking $1,500 from our account, all for a child that isn't even his. Silas's head was in his hands. Oh God, Celeste, I'm so sorry. I believed her. You believed her, I said, my voice softening slightly as I looked at my broken husband. Because you're a good man who was manipulated by a professional liar. I turned back to Sabine, who was clutching Marcus protectively against her chest. The little boy was crying now, overwhelmed by the adult emotions swirling around him. But the real question, Sabine, is who is Marcus's actual father? Because according to this report, you've been lying to everyone about everything. So who were you really with during those 2 months? Who's the man you've been protecting while you destroyed 2 other men's lives? Sabine's carefully constructed facade finally crumbled completely, her face twisted with rage and desperation. You don't understand anything, you bitter old woman. You have no idea what it's like to be young and alone with a baby. No idea what I've had to do to survive. Survive? I laughed, and the sound was sharp as broken glass. You call manipulating good people and breaking up families surviving? You call taking money from a grieving widower under false pretenses surviving? I leaned forward, placing my hands flat on the table. No, Sabine. What you've been doing is fraud. And fraud, Sabine, has consequences. Legal ones. Financial ones. The kind you can't flirt or lie your way out of. The DNA report lay between us on the table like evidence in a courtroom. And for the first time since I'd known her, Sabine Morrison had absolutely nothing to say. Marcus looked up at his mother with tears streaming down his face. Mommy, why is everyone yelling? I want to go home. In that moment, I realized this innocent little boy was the real victim in Sabine's web of lies, and that realization would determine everything that happened next. What happened next will stay with me for the rest of my life. Graham slowly stood up from his chair, his movements mechanical, Like a man in shock, he walked around the table to where Sabine sat clutching Marcus, and for a moment I thought he might collapse entirely. Instead, he knelt down in front of the little boy, who had called him Daddy for 6 years. "Marcus," he said softly, his voice breaking, "I want you to know that no matter what the grown-ups are talking about, no matter what any test says, you will always be my son. Do you understand? Always." Marcus threw his arms around Graham's neck, sobbing. "I don't want a different daddy. I want you to be my daddy." The raw emotion in that child's voice broke something inside all of us. Even Sabine started crying, though I couldn't tell if it was from guilt or fear of losing her meal ticket. "You are not taking him anywhere," Graham said, standing up and facing his wife with a steel in his voice I'd never heard before. "I don't care what your lies cost me. I don't care what I have to do legally. But that boy is not losing the only real father he's ever known because of your games." "Graham, please," Sabine started, but he cut her off with a look that could have frozen fire. Don't you dare try to manipulate me anymore. 6 years, Sabine. 6 years of marriage built on lies. How many other men have you been running this scam on? How many other families have you destroyed?" Silas finally looked up from his hands. His face aged a decade in the span of an hour. "Celeste, can you ever forgive me? I was such a fool. I let her convince me that I was doing the right thing, that I was being honorable." I walked over to my husband and placed my hand on his shoulder. "Silas, you were manipulated by a professional. She studied your guilt about your first wife, your sense of responsibility, and she weaponized it against you." "But I should have known," he whispered. "I should have insisted on a test from the beginning, instead of just sending money." "How much?" Graham asked suddenly. "How much has she been bleeding from you?" Silas looked ashamed to answer. $8,000 over 6 months. Maybe more. I stopped keeping track." Graham's face went white. $8,000, while I've been working overtime to afford the house she wanted, the clothes she needed, the lifestyle she demanded, and all along, she had a secret income stream. "It wasn't supposed to be permanent," Sabine said desperately. "I just needed help getting back on my feet. I was going to tell you the truth eventually." "What truth?" I demanded. "Because even now, with DNA evidence in front of you, you haven't told us who Marcus's real father is." Sabine's eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal looking for escape. His father? His father doesn't matter. He's not in the picture. He never was. "Convenient," Graham said bitterly. "Let me guess. He's married or moved away, or died in some tragic accident that makes it impossible to verify your story." The silence that followed was telling. "My God," Graham breathed. "You don't even know, do you? You don't know who Marcus's father is because there were so many possibilities you can't narrow it down." Sabine's face crumpled, and for the first time, I saw her without any masks at all. She looked young and scared and desperate, everything she'd probably been 6 years ago, when she found herself pregnant and alone. But my sympathy only went so far. "Pack your things," Graham said quietly. "You and Marcus can stay at your sister's tonight. Tomorrow we're going to sit down with lawyers and figure out how to handle this mess you've created." "You can't throw us out," Sabine protested. "It's my house too." "Actually," I said, pulling out my phone, "I've already called my lawyer friend, Patricia. She's very interested in discussing fraud charges, extortion, and what she called a clear pattern of financial manipulation. Apparently, taking money under false pretenses is quite serious when there's documentation." Sabine went pale. "You wouldn't. Try me," I said simply. The fight went out of her then. She gathered Marcus in her arms, the little boy still crying and confused, and headed toward the door. But as she reached the threshold, she turned back one last time. "This isn't over, Celeste. You think you've won, but you've just destroyed a family. That little boy is going to grow up knowing his whole life was built on lies because of what you did tonight." I looked at her steadily. "No, Sabine. Marcus is going to grow up knowing that sometimes the people who love you most are the ones brave enough to tell you the truth." She left without another word, taking Marcus with her into the cold Thanksgiving night. The wind caught the door as it closed behind her, rattling the windows like the echoes of every lie she had told. If you believe, like I do, that truth is the only foundation a family can stand on, please hit the subscribe button and share this story, and tell me in the comments, have you ever seen someone's lies finally collapse? The three of us sat in the ruins of our family dinner, surrounded by cold turkey and broken trust, trying to figure out how to rebuild from the wreckage of Sabine's lies. Families aren't built by blood or by lies. They're built by love, by loyalty, and by courage. And tonight, in the ashes of betrayal, we finally had the chance to build something real again. 6 months have passed since that Thanksgiving dinner, and I'm sitting in my kitchen writing this letter, watching through the window as Graham teaches Marcus how to ride a bicycle in our backyard. Yes, our backyard. Graham moved back in with us 3 weeks after Sabine left town. He couldn't afford the house payments without her secret income, and honestly, none of us wanted to be alone anymore. The divorce was finalized last month. Sabine didn't contest it. She was too busy dealing with the fraud charges my lawyer friend Patricia helped Graham file. Turns out taking $8,000 under false pretenses is indeed a serious crime, especially when there's a paper trail. Graham got full custody of Marcus. The judge said that, after 6 years of believing Graham was his father, it would be traumatic to remove the child from the only stable parent he'd ever known. Biology doesn't make a family. Love and commitment do. Silas and I went to counseling for 4 months. It wasn't easy rebuilding trust after such a massive betrayal, but we both learned something important. Sometimes the people we love most can be fooled by those who want to hurt us. The key is choosing to forgive and move forward together. Marcus still calls me Grandma Celeste and Silas, Grandpa Cy. He doesn't understand all the adult complications, and we've decided he doesn't need to. What matters is that he's surrounded by people who love him unconditionally, not because of his DNA, but because of who he is. As for Sabine, we heard through Graham's lawyer that she moved to another state and married a man she met online. I feel sorry for him, but mostly I feel sorry for her. Living a life built on lies must be exhausting. Sometimes when I'm watching Graham and Marcus together, I think about that Thanksgiving dinner and how close we came to losing everything. Sabine wanted me to disappear from my own family, to step aside and let her lies become our reality. But here's what I learned that night. Sometimes the only way to reclaim your seat at the table is to pull the chair out from under the person who stole it. Sabine thought the best gift was for me to disappear, but in the end, the real gift was exposing the truth and proving that I belong right here with my family. Do you think I was right to stand up for my family? Or should I have stayed quiet to keep the peace? Have you ever had to choose between uncomfortable truth and comfortable lies? Families aren't destroyed by lies. They're destroyed when we stop fighting for the truth. And that night, I chose to fight. What would you have done in my situation? Have you ever faced something like this in your own family? Please share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to tell me what city you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe and like this video. It truly helps spread these letters to more people. Thank you so much for listening until the very end. This is Letters to Helen. And I'll see you in the next story.